Let's talk about one of the most disturbing books I've read in recent memory. I had never heard of this book before, even though it feels like a book that should be included in a lot of like most disturbing book lists that I've seen. And I feel like, first off, I have kind of an issue with a lot of like extreme horror books because it really is just like the blood and gore of it all and not like the true psychological evil that can exist. And I feel like this is one of those books where it's just like, how could this have happened? And I mean, you get to understand exactly how and why, and it's just really, it's kind of disturbing. Like I said, I had never heard of it. I happened to see this book at Barnes& and Noble and was like, that might be interesting. I treat Barnes& and Noble like a library in that I will go, I will browse books, and then I'll just take pictures of books that sound interesting, borrow them from my library, and then if I like them enough, then I'll go back and buy them. So at the beginning of July, I was looking for a kind of pulpy, fun horror book, I guess. Just something chill and easy. Nothing too crazy, nothing too, nothing that required a ton of thinking. And I saw this book in my TBR and was like, oh, that might be fun. And it was available for me to borrow, and it seemed like a good time. It was not. This book was really disturbing in a lot of different ways, and I feel like more people should be talking about it. It's been republished because of Grady Hendrix. He has this whole like Paperbacks from Hell series, I believe, and this is one of them. So it has an introduction from Hendrix. I did not read. I don't like reading introductions if I don't have to. Sue me. Also, I think on this introduction it said that it did contain spoilers, so skip ahead if you don't know what happens in the book. So I went ahead and skipped ahead. We're just gonna go over the plot. It's just gonna be a regular old review and summary of what happened and my thoughts along the way. Trigger warnings right off the bat for rape and blood and some kind of like body horror, honestly. Let's get right into it. So the book opens up. Oh, what is this book called? This is Let's Go Play at the Atoms by Mendal Johnson. And this was originally written in, I think, like 1972, late 60s, early 70s. So just to give context for the book. So our prologue opens by giving us some kind of background about our characters and what is going on. So Barbara is babysitting two children, Cindy, who is 10, and Bobby, who is 13, while their parents, the Adams, are away in Europe for 2 weeks. This takes place, I think, right at the beginning of week 2. So they live in the country in Maryland. They have a couple neighbors, but it's like, it's a good walk to get to the neighbors' houses. Like they're at least a mile away from each other. So kind of insulated, but not totally isolated, I would say. Some of the neighbors are John, who is 16, and then siblings Paul and Diane. Paul's 13 and Diane is 17. And they all make up what they call the Freedom Five. So all these 5 children play together because they don't have anyone else nearby. Chapter 1 starts with Barbara waking up, and she is tied and gagged down to her bed. Bobby is asleep and wakes up and sees her and checks on her knots and then leaves running for Cindy. When the two come back, they are like celebrating and they're like, yes, we got her, we did it. And then they leave the room to make themselves breakfast. Barbara is obviously shocked, confused, and has a little bit of whiplash. So she realizes pretty quickly, though, especially because of how Bobby has, acted already, is that the children tied her up, that she is being held hostage by the children. So Barbara begins to have a conversation with, like in her head, with her roommate, Terry. And Terry is kind of like, I don't know how to describe Terry in this book. She's someone that Barbara has all these conversations with. Terry's kind of like, not the voice of reason, but the voice of reality in a lot of ways. So they have this entire back and forth where Barbara, like I said, kind of concludes that they chloroformed her and tied her up while she was asleep. Terry is very practical in her conversations with Barbara, stating that they can't keep you gagged forever. You gotta eat and drink. Pretty soon they'll get curious. They'll want to know what you think about their grand joke. And when they do ungag you, don't yell or scream or lose your temper. Talk to them, be interested in all this. Sooner or later, they'll get bored silly and let you go. A couple hours later, the other 3 kids come over, Diane, Paul, and John. When they enter the house, Bobby explains how he captured Barbara. Barbara is like, oh wow, that is actually a lot more planned than I would have expected. Like, there was a lot of planning that went into this. The others go and see Barbara for themselves, and then they all go and have a meeting to establish some ground rules, which are: watch her, I'll be here whenever they move her, I'll be there whenever she has her gag out, be neat and clean up, watch for telephone calls, eat, and then do any grocery shopping, and then Cindy has to take care of her hair. Because early in the book, Cindy complains about having to wash and brush her hair because she's 10. So after the meeting, the five take Barbara to the bathroom, and they're super careful to never totally free her. So they like don't untie her from the bed until she's tied to like the foot of the bed, like one of the posts. It takes a long time for them to like figure out everything, because even though this is a really thought out plan, they're not like experts in tying up people. So they're using like way more knots and ropes than they actually need to, and like they're not being as conservative with the rope as they possibly could be. Paul suggests that they put a rope around her neck to force her to go where they want, like kind of like a leash. They instead decide to pull and push her, all five of them, instead of leading her by the neck. Later, they feed her, and there's a lot of debate about how to go about gagging and ungagging her. Barbara basically complies because at this point she knows like she has no control over the situation, so her best way to move forward is just to kind of comply as much as she can. Also, her conversation with Terry saying like, don't scream as soon as they ungag you. While Barbara is ungagged, she very much tries to reason with them, saying that they'll get in trouble whenever someone finds out. She says, you know what's going to happen, just decide for yourselves what's best. If you keep going on and someone finds out before you let me go, you'll be even worse trouble. They ignore her, they regag her, and everyone but Diane goes swimming, leaving Diane to take the first watch of Barbara, and it's immediately clear that Diane is going to ignore her and not ungag her or engage with her. So chapter 2 opens with John kind of musing on his adolescence. He's 16. He's very much like ready to be an adult. He's over being a kid. He's over all the bullshit of being a kid. He just wants to be like an adult with the freedom that he thinks that will grant him. He also thinks about Barbara and her body. He's like, oh yeah, I've seen her in a bikini multiple times before. Like, the way I'm looking at her now is really whatever. And how seeing her in her bikini left, quote, exactly 3.5 small things to the imagination. He's thinking about Barbara as a tool for sex and women as a tool for sex. He thinks about different girls and how, quote, they might touch you now and then, but if you touched back, they pushed you away even if you had broken something. He feels that Barbara is being very submissive and alluring while being held captive, when like literally she's just existing because she's being held captive. Then we get some insight on Paul and his kind of thought process. Quote, the world constantly reported itself to him as louder, harsher, wider, funnier, sadder, more menacing and intricate than it did to others. Paul had assumed that everyone else felt exactly as he did, saw the exact same things he did. The difference was that, somehow, everyone seemed to control themselves better. The question of why puzzled him very much. Why shouldn't they twitch and cry out too? We learn that he has nightmares and occasionally will wet the bed, and Diane will slip him sleeping pills. So Paul is not okay psychologically. Like, there's clearly something off with him from the jump. So then on the night of that first day, we get some perspective from Cindy, and I think Cindy is a really interesting character because she's the youngest. She very much wants to be a big kid with the rest of the adults. Like, I remember when I was 10 how much older and wiser and stronger the 13, 14, 15-year-olds that I knew were, and how I just wanted to be an adult like them. My sister is 4 years older than me, and seeing like her and her friends, like I wanted to be a big kid with them. So I very much like understand Cindy's perspective, and I think it's really interesting the way that she acts, because she very much acts like a 10-year-old. Anyway, at length she stood by herself, absolutely free and solitary, and it all bored her to death. In fact, freedom, the way the older kids described it, was not all that great. She missed the presence of adults. Someone was always asking what she wanted, what she was going to do, and someone was always watching, correcting, encouraging, and applauding all her deeds. Who she really missed, however, was Barbara. Not, of course, the person Barbara, which she could see at any time she chose, but the fun and excitement of Barbara. So Cindy is like a very interesting character because she is kind of like the belle of the ball in her own eyes. She wants that attention. She wants the praise from adults because, again, she's 10. Bobby and Cindy take care of themselves before, like with dinner and cleaning up after themselves. And then Barbara, while she's alone, is having another mental conversation with Terry, where Terry says that the reason why Barbara ended up in this situation is because the kids just aren't afraid of her, and calls Barbara a Barbie doll. This theme of Barbara as a Barbie doll is present throughout the book. There's a lot of times where Barbara is thinking to herself that they are treating her like a doll, especially in the fact that she is at their whim, that she has no control over her situation. She moves when they want her to. She eats when they want her to. She only talks whenever they want her to. So I think it's very apt that Mendal named Barbara Barbara. So the next morning, the children are already way less timid around Barbara. So this is, I believe, this would be on day 2. So this is like Tuesday. But they're already way less timid around Barbara. They already are way less scared of her. They really don't think that she's ever going to be able to get out. And they're also already showing a lot more aggression towards her and their treatment of her. So again, when discussing how to take her to the bathroom, Bobby says, "I'm going to put 2 turns of rope around her neck when she walks, so it would hurt more." Paul immediately jumps in and wants to pull her, to which Cindy exclaims he wants to choke her. Cindy, again, like, this is a game to her. She doesn't see the alarm in a sentence like he wants to choke her when Paul is, again, like 13. And that's interesting. That's really interesting. Later in the day, Barbara tries to reason with Diane, asking why they're doing this. This is a recurring theme from Barbara, is that she's just asking why. She wants to understand what these children are thinking, what they're planning, what they're doing, and why they are doing everything that they're doing. A lot of the times they kind of brush her off and are really nonchalant about their situation and what they're doing to Barbara. For example, Diane says that it's only a game and they're not really hurting her. She also then reveals that it's a game that the 5 had played before all together, which each kid taking turns being the captive, like being Barbara. Diane is like, "Yeah, we've all played that game. You played it too when you were a kid." And Barbara's like, "No, I did not. Like, that is not a normal game to be playing." After lunch, John watches Barbara, and again, Barbara is asking, "Why are you guys doing this?" John says, quote, "We thought it would be fun, I guess." Barbara feels like there's a lot of tension in the room between her and John, and so she's trying to kind of de-escalate things and really like talk to him one-on-one, human to human. When John asks if the rope is too tight, Barbara says yes, and he loosens the ties a little bit. She then begins to play into her meekness and like her seduction and begins acting as what she calls sexy Barbara. So she's very much playing into this, her sexuality of the situation and the allure that John already very much sees. She makes a lot of small talk with John, asking about, school and sports and like dating, if he's dating anyone. John asks about how it is dating in college and then asks if he can kiss her, and this exchange takes place. Barbara says, "No, John, I don't want to." "Why?" "It's silly. It doesn't mean anything that way." "Yes, it does." "How can it?" "Well, I like you." "Ah. Are you mad or something?" "No," Barbara said quickly. "No, really, it's nice. I'm glad you like me, but you still don't want to." "Well, it's not very romantic for me like this." And then John says, "You couldn't stop me." And Barbara says, "That makes it worse." So already there's this power dynamic that John is kind of implementing where he's like, it actually does not matter what you say. I will do what I want to. I think this entire like kissing situation is a double-edged sword, because if Barbara says yes, then what's stopping John from taking things further than she wants? And if Barbara says no, then she risks pissing him off, which she does. He shuts down immediately after getting rejected and ties her back up and makes the ties even tighter than before. Later, John kind of muses on the power that he holds over her and how he can give and take things from her. For favors which he was able to give, she more or less had to consent to being handled. For things he wanted which she could give, he could withhold his favors. If she wished more freedom, she would really have to beg for it. If she wished to be ungagged, she would also have to be kissed. which I think sets the scene pretty perfectly for what happens in subsequent chapters. Then we get a scene where Bobby and Paul are sitting and discussing Barbara and like what to do about her and what's going on with her. Paul states that, quote, "It would be tough if we could do all the things you do to real prisoners. Take off her clothes and whip her and stuff like that. When we come in the morning, she's all spread out and tied up, right? And before we untie her, Diane just cuts the things over her shoulder and along the sides and opens her up." Which I think also really shows where Paul's state of mind is. He's not thinking about like, oh, I have freedom now. He's very much seeing Barbara as something that he can like play and toy with. And he is one of the people who really advocates for escalating the situation with Barbara. John is immediately on board with the idea. He's like, yeah, let's get her naked. Hell yeah. So then John says, we ought to be able to say what we want and everyone should help. You know, like if you want her gagged when it's your turn, okay. If you don't, okay. If you want her in a chair, okay. And if you want her in the bed or anything else, okay. What the person guarding wants, we all agree to, and we help. If you want the door closed, okay. What I think is really intriguing about this conversation is that both boys, Paul and John, are setting up a way to get what they want with Barbara while being very nonchalant and kind of like indirect about it. Because John isn't saying, yeah, I want her naked so I can have sex with her. He's just like, well, if it's something that someone wants to do, then we should all do it. And then Paul isn't saying, I want to, you know, mutilate her body to see what happens. He's like, well, we could treat her like a real prisoner. Just, haha, JK, unless, you know, and I think that's really interesting. I know I keep saying that everything's really interesting, but I just found this book so interesting and intriguing with these characters. They all felt very realistic in how they were going about this entire thing, how they each treat Barbara and how they treat the entire situation. They're all so naive because they're all children. They're not thinking at all about the further repercussions of even the initial act of tying up Barbara. They're not thinking about what they're going to do when the parents come home, you know? And I just think that's interesting. Anyway, so Bobby, hearing this, is really upset because he's like, I thought we were just going to tie her up so we can do what we want. I didn't think we were going to, like, harm her, you know? John and Paul both tackle him and hold him down and force him to agree to help with the new plan. So Bobby is already kind of losing control over the situation. He starts very much as like the leader of the group and like what they're doing to Barbara. But I think that this is a very early turning point in where he's losing his footing over the group and over the kind of sanity of the group and holding back what they're going to do. So that night, Cindy goes and is watching Barbara, and she takes off the gag and gives Barbara some food and water because, again, Cindy's bored. She just wants to talk to someone. She just wants someone to dote on her. She asks if it hurts being tied up and shares that she's been a prisoner as well in the Freedom Fives gang. She says, quote, "We kidnap hostages and take prisoners and torture them and stuff. It's kind of fun. Well, when it isn't your turn to be caught. Even then, it isn't too bad most of the time. Paul's the really mean one, though. When he's jailer, watch out. He's always thinking up new things to do. Once he tied me up so tight, he even tied my toes together. Then he tickled me. He's the best at torturing." Sydney also reveals that they plan to strip Barbara the following morning and says, quote, "It isn't all that bad anyhow. Well, it's bad when it's you and everyone's laughing and all, but when it's someone else's turn, it's funny." Again, like, this is such a disturbing game that these children are playing. Like, not only are they tying each other up and low-key torturing each other, they're also stripping each other down and forcing them to just, like, stand there naked. Like, this is so fucked up. These children are so unwell. So Barbara then immediately starts screaming for Bobby. Cindy runs out of the room. She's, like, terrified. And the two children together smother her and manage to chloroform her. Insane. So on to chapter 4. It is the next morning, I believe it's now Wednesday. Barbara wakes up and is kind of musing on her situation and starts to liken herself to a doll. Like I said, she says, quote, "Okay, I am their new toy. Like Terry said, I walk, I talk when they let me. They can move my arms and legs. They can even dress and undress me if they want. But how do they play with dolls?" She wonders what like the escalation of this game will be, coming to the conclusion that the escalation will be her death. The morning comes and the children come into the room. They undress her just as they had planned. Diane like cuts the very top of her nightgown and then down the sides so they can just like pull it off of her. I think what is really interesting is that Diane is talking about like repairing her nightgown as if she's just gonna put it on once this is all done and then everything will be back to normal. The kids all have very different reactions to seeing Barbara completely naked. Cindy is like laughing. She's like giggling. Bobby is really quiet. Paul is like twitching. Diane is just like holding the scissors, like very like whatever about it. And John won't like look at her, won't look in her eyes. When he finally does, Barbara thinks, quote, she understands that this undressing has dehumanized her and the kids know it too. So John finally raises his head and looks in her eyes, and she is like shook to the core. Like there is something evil in John's eyes, and she understands that this undressing has officially dehumanized her, and the kids also have dehumanized her. So later, Barbara is talking with Diane, and Diane states that they did this whole thing kind of as a dare, just to see if they could do it. Diane, when asked why they keep going, says, why not? I feel like Diane is, in a way, in denial about the situation. She's the oldest and she's the only woman in the group, so I feel like you would expect her to have the most empathy and sympathy for Barbara, but she somehow feels like the most detached. She very much just like brushes off what happens when the parents come in, or when the parents will return, and is in denial that they're hurting Barbara at all. Diane is very much like, well, this happened to me, so of course it's going to happen to you too. Diane is a really interesting character. I think she's the most intriguing out of the 5 kids, just because she's the least straightforward. Once it's Paul's turn to watch, he requests that she is re-gagged, and he closes the door and pulls a knife out of his pocket. Quote, he moved the knife from side to side and again watched her eyes follow. It was like holding a switch over a dog and not beating him yet, but it was far, far better. He then proceeds to like poke and prod at Barbara with this knife, just like teasing her that he's going to cut her, but he doesn't. He drags the knife like all the way across her skin, pokes the tip into her neck. Quote, he let the point of his knife trickle down between them to her navel and her pale white belly, where he pressed in just hard enough to make her wince and squirm. Then a new game began. Stick her here and make her twist that way. Stick her there and make her twist back again. This way, that way, harder. He blindfolds her and then just continues his little game with the knife. After Paul, is John's turn to watch, and just going to reiterate again, content warning, rape. I don't go into very much detail, if any real detail at all, except to just say like the very quick what happens. However, I understand that that can still be too much for some people, so I definitely encourage anyone who doesn't want to hear anything about the rape at all to skip to the timestamp listed on screen now. So Barbara is still tied up, gagged, blindfolded, and Barbara knows what's happening now. Like, she understands what John's intentions are. John does not think much of Barbara. He thinks she's really stuck up and really annoying, acts more like a mom than a babysitter should. There's a lot of build up to this initial rape scene, and I appreciate to an extent that it wasn't graphic. I think by the time we get later in the book, I forgot that more graphic scenes happen. So it was a really uncomfortable scene to read for a lot of different reasons. Barbara is completely helpless, and John loves that fact. He very much is treating her like a doll, like an object. Barbara shakes her head violently from side to side, no, no, no. And that is when he did it to her. That's all that is explained of this rape, which I guess I can appreciate, but it was still really disturbing for a lot of different reasons. After John's turn to watch Barbara is Diane's, and she berates him for what he did. And she also doesn't believe that he actually was able to do it. She's like, no, she's tied up. There's no way he actually penetrated her. Diane helps clean up Barbara, and when Barbara is ungagged, she tries to appeal to Diane, quote, that boy raped me. You know about that, you're a woman. And Barbara says that she's not on the pill and that she's really worried about pregnancy. And then Diane, again, is just kind of muttering to herself. She's like, I just don't believe he did that. Like, there's no way. It's physically impossible. Chapter 5 is kind of that night, the different perspectives of what happened that day. John feels no remorse about the rape. Absolutely none. He feels as if he had like accomplished something that adults just don't want him to do and be able to do. Quote, life was going to be endless and suddenly wonderful. He was going to do it again, of course, but better if possible, for himself anyway. He's so incredibly selfish in this entire endeavor. He talks about how he wants to take a wife at one point who is meek and submissive and does exactly as he says. Paul is also having similar revelations about, adults in life and adolescence. He hates adults, finds them really stupid, and he thinks of Barbara, quote, only of her skin and of his knife blade passing in and passing out, passing in and passing out, accompanied by the instant appearance of blood. We also learn that Diane has read him and told him, quote, tales of Nazi atrocities, the Salem witch trials, the fate of the early Christian martyrs, or the human sacrifices of primitive people. He saw the small iron cage hoisted by rattling chains. He heard the shrieks, saw the dimly lit figure in the cage flinging itself around in captive agony. He heard the flesh crackle like bacon in a skillet. He saw the iron glow red until its content was nearly entirely consumed. I think that Paul could have been a very normal child if not for Diane. I think Diane is truly the more depraved one in the relationship, but because Paul is so much more outwardly depraved, it looks like he's the more fucked up one, when really I think it's Diane. I think she is not well mentally at all in a much different way than Paul. So that night, Wednesday night, Bobby wakes and goes and checks on Barbara, and he definitely starts to feel sympathy towards Barbara. He understands that they're hurting her and that she is looking a little rough around the edges. Quote, her eyes were red with irritation and open, wide, and dry, and the pupils were abnormally dark. Her wrists and ankles were chafed and scraped from the rope, her hands, which he did not dare touch, and her feet were dark colored and cold. Circulation. Her stomach was flat, not to say hollow. The torture was beginning to show. Bobby wants to help her, but he feels kind of paralyzed too because of the Freedom Five. Paul and John have already shown that they will use violent means to get Bobby to comply with what they want. I also think that Bobby is a big victim to groupthink and a little bit to the bystander effect, where he just, I don't think, like, this wasn't fully his idea. He was just happened to be his babysitter that he did this to. So that night, Bobby, as he's like checking on Barbara, he notices a fire off in the distance, like a little campfire, and it looks like someone's walking back and forth in front of it. He isn't able to see who exactly the figure is, but he goes and gets his father's shotgun and kind of patrols outside. He goes all the way to like this vegetable garden and is able to watch the fire and falls asleep. And then during the night, we just get Barbara's thinking about the aftermath of the rape. She thinks about like that she's not on the pill, that she might be pregnant. How could she even get an abortion? Because it's 1970. That's not something that you can just do nearly as easy as today. And even today, it's not that easy. She also, and this kind of broke my heart for Barbara, but she very much thinks about like the fact that she's no longer a virgin and that John had taken this thing from her and that she's no longer, chaste, that people aren't going to want her, that they're going to look down on her. And I know it's not revolutionary for me to say. I'm not going to pretend I'm the first one to say this, but if you are a victim of rape, that's not you losing your virginity. If that's how you want to think about it, okay, I guess, but like that does not have to be it. Virginity is such a weird concept and there's so much to it, and it is a much larger discussion than what I feel like having for this exact book and this exact moment. But if it will heal you to think about the fact that you did not lose your virginity in rape, then that's it. It just, like, it makes me feel so sad for her that she thinks so much less of herself and that she's so worried about everything else. And she also becomes very cynical towards men. She kind of shares about growing up being kind of like sexually harassed by neighborhood boys, and I think any woman growing up, especially in adolescence, has a story where they were harassed by neighborhood boys. And so she thinks about them a lot and she's like, oh, they were right, that's all I'll ever be. And I just feel so sorry for Barbara because she is more than just her sex and her sexuality. And it frustrates me. It makes me really sad for her. Okay, so the next morning, I believe it is now Thursday morning, Bobby tells the Freedom Five about the fire that he saw last night, and he thinks that it must have been a picker, which is, like a migrant worker who are hired temporarily to help with the harvest. Very common thing, especially back then. Probably still very common now. They go out to like the fire to investigate and see where like the picker had his fire, and they're all worried that he's gonna eventually wander up to the house and discover Barbara. Diane says very chill, very nonchalant, that they'll have to shoot him if he does. Later, while taking Barbara to the bathroom, she attacks Diane. She like body slams her into the sink, and she like grabs her hair, and then like cracks her head against the cabinet, because they give Barbara like one hand free so that she's able to like take care of herself in the bathroom. The rest of the five come running, and John punches Barbara in the face, immediately knocking her out. They have another meeting, and it's at this meeting where it's very clear that Diane is now the one in charge. Bobby has lost his leadership role, and it is now on Diane. She is the one that is going to man everything. She decides that they'll take Barbara downstairs and hang her up down there. They take her down the stairs, and she's too tall to be hung up like this. So instead, they tie her hands behind her back and hang her up like this. Which is incredibly painful. I could not imagine. Paul is like impressed that they were even able to take her down to the stairs, and he's like, yeah, we did that. Look at us go. Like, I was like, brother, you're torturing someone. Like, the dissonance that this entire group has, especially Diane being like, there's no way we're hurting you, when like clearly Barbara is being hurt. It's insane. So Diane, still very much angry that Barbara hurt her, goes up to her and like twists her breast and then like slaps her across the face. And Cindy is like overwhelmed. Like, she does not understand the feelings that she's having. Quote, she felt her face become hot as it did when she was about to go into total despair crying time. It was all bad, and Barbara was bad to have caused all of it. She then goes up to Barbara and punches her, and then Diane's like, no, this is my punching bag right now. Back off. I think this in particular was really interesting because Sydney is starting to feel like there is something wrong, that there is like, that this is a bad situation, right? And that something is bad. But instead of recognizing that like the bad feeling, the bad situation is because of their actions, the kids' actions, she blames it on Barbara. She doesn't see that the situation is bad, that they had to hang her up in the basement because of them. She's like, well, Barbara made us do it. Which again, I think is really interesting, and also how someone in Cindy's situation would react and would kind of disconnect from the situation. So they hear a car coming towards the house, and Barbara immediately starts to like thrash around and starts to breathe like super loudly. She's, hope. The kids panic, so Diane starts to give orders. She tells the boys to go get in their swimsuits and act like they're about to go swimming. Sydney go to the bathroom and act like she is Barbara, and then Diane will answer the door. So she answers the door, and it's Mr. Tillman, who is like the neighbor grocer, and he's there to deliver their groceries. He asks for Barbara, who, is the adult that needs to sign off on the groceries, and Diane calls to her, saying that she's in the bathroom. Cindy answers, and she tries to sound like Barbara. At one point, she says, just sign for them like mommy does. And then Diane's like, oh, I could kill her. I could kill her. If Mr. Tillman caught that, I could kill him. I would kill her. Diane then goes to the bathroom, pretends to get Barbara's signature, and then the boys walk in, say that they're going swimming, and everything is totally squared away, and Mr. Tillman does not bat an eye. He's like, oh yeah, the boys are going swimming. Diane can sign for this. I know Diane. Oh, neighbor Sydney girl. What a beautiful little darling baby girl. Anyway, so they totally get away with it. Later in the day, the five are discussing what to do about the picker, and Diane's like, just leave on all the lights so that he knows we're home. John offers to like take his boat out and go up the stream and kind of scope out the picker and try to scare him off. Diane kind of laments offhandedly that she wishes there was a way to blame the picker on everything that the children have done, because it'd be easier to just be like, oh yeah, this random guy tied up Barbara, not us. Why would we do that? That night, it's Paul's turn to watch, and he's really annoyed that Barbara isn't responding to his like knife teasing because of everything she had been through that day. So it is Thursday night, and John does as he says and goes up the stream to scope out the picker. He floats near him and then like sees the picker in the water, kind of like bathing himself, and is freaked out. John is petrified of this guy. It's very much one of those things where the kids have built up this like terrifying being that the picker could be, way more scary and fearful than the picker actually is. Okay, so the picker sees John and has like some very small talk with him. He asks if John is the one who lives up at the house and says that the neighborhood is nice and quiet. John freaks out and rows away from the picker. Like, again, it's a very chill conversation that the two have. The picker's like, oh, hey, is that your house up there? It's beautiful. Great place to live. And John's like, oh my God, he's gonna kill me. And like rows away. Bobby wakes up in the night to Cindy screaming and calling for him. She says that she saw the picker in the basement window and is like freaked out. Bobby is then worried that the picker might have seen Barbara and does a search of the house and can't find any signs of him. He takes over watch for the rest of the night. Barbara, she's thinking about her situation and the children. Quote, the point of the game, as the children have played it among themselves, was to inflict, observe, and experiment with the feelings of helplessness, humiliation, and pain. They were a cold and unfeeling little group, and they had progressed almost smoothly, almost naturally, from the idea of capturing Barbara to the execution of the idea, and steadily to the abuse of her. They are capable of anything now. They might not even know it themselves. So again, like, Barbara is thinking a lot about these children and the escalation of what they're doing to her, and she notices that Bobby is like the most worn and worried about the situation. She sees that he's under a lot of strain and it's really starting to take a toll on him. So the next morning, I believe now it is Friday morning, the five gather and they all exchange information about the picker and their sightings. They have a meeting where Paul says that they should kill Barbara. He's like, we should kill her, just out of the blue. John's like, yeah, you know what? We could blame it on the picker. Bobby is like, what? No, how would we even kill her? And Paul states super ominously, like we always do. What does that mean, Paul? Paul, what do you mean? Paul, how do you guys always do it? Paul, what do you mean? Diane, again, the leader, outlines the plan. They'll make it look like the picker broke in, locked Bobby and Cindy in the closet, and that John would come over the next day, let them out, and then they would discover Barbara. Diane says that they would need to have the picker in the house at some point to plant all of his fingerprints and that the police won't believe him because he's, quote, just a picker. Bobby is the only one who's like, no guys, we should not kill Barbara. They take a vote and Bobby is immediately outnumbered. Later in the day, John, Cindy, and Bobby are all at the creek and Bobby is still pushing back on the idea. He's like, we're gonna get caught. We should just let her go. We'll make her promise not to say anything. John is like, well, you don't have to be part of the killing if you don't want to. And he threatens, quote, stand your guard, shut up, or it'll be you instead of her. You can't get away from us. So later they feed Barbara, but they don't feed her that much. The children are worried about like her stomach contents revealing her time of death. So they try not to feed her too much, or like they're very periodic about when they are going to feed her. They also are like, well, we don't want to deal with her like pissing and shitting when she dies. So that's a whole part of it too. Sydney kind of explains this. She's like, but if you have just enough at the right time, you don't, and nobody knows the difference. And Barbara's like, who does it make a difference to? And Sydney's just like, oh, the coroners. And she fully admits that they're going to kill her. Barbara starts screaming and then is promptly gagged. Later, the kids are kind of worried about it looking like it's going to rain. And then the car tracks leaving, like the tire tracks leaving tracks in the mud. So they decide to move her that day. So there's the Adams house and then there's like the tenant house. So the tenant house was the summer house while they were building the Adams house. So now it's kind of dilapidated and it's where the Freedom Five would go play like before this whole situation. And so that's where they decide to move Barbara. Sydney is way too scared to stay in like the tenant house alone, but she also doesn't want to stay in the big house alone. So Diane is like, just stay over for the night. We can like make a cake to celebrate the Adams returning or whatever. And then John will come at some point in the night and relieve Bobby. So they struggle to get Barbara out of the house and into the tenant house. They like drop her a couple times, but they're like, it's whatever because the bruises will fit our entire story. Like she would get a little beat up if she was being dragged out by the picker. They are like trying to shove her in the back of the station wagon because they're like gonna drive her from the main house to the tenant house. And John is like getting pissed off. So he just like punches her in the chest and she immediately goes limp. She's not breathing super well and Bobby is like freaking out. The Adams father is a doctor. So Bobby's like, I am a bit of a doctor too. So he's like, it's too early for her to die. She can't die right now. So they remove her gag and John starts giving her mouth to mouth. After a little bit, Barbara mutters, she's like, don't. And so they're like great, she's good. Cindy also points out how messy Barbara's hair is and how it looks like she hasn't taken care of herself in a little bit, which like she hasn't. So Diane's like, we'll have to wash her hair and clean her up. They drive to the tenant house and then re-gag Barbara. They take her upstairs in the house to avoid being seen in any of the first floor windows. And then they put her in a corner where it's going to be the driest, because again, it looks like it's about to rain. They hog tie her down, so like, and feet together behind her back, and that they're like, oh, that'll keep her as immobile as possible. So once she's there, the five then go and cover their tracks. They like dust out the tire tracks from in front of the tenant house. They leave the car outside so that the rain will wash away any like smudges that Barbara might have made on the car. And then that's kind of it for the day for their planning. Like tomorrow will be a lot more planning of the day. Once they're all finished, everyone goes to their respected homes, leaving just Bobby there. So when it is just Bobby and Barbara, he's like reflecting on the entire situation, and he's the only child that shows any kind of remorse or worry or hesitation about the entire Barbara situation. I think for Bobby, the only reason why he did this was because he was like, oh, we'll have freedom for like a week. And that was it. He didn't want to really hurt Barbara. He didn't want to torture her. He didn't want to undress her or do any of the things that they've done like since that point. He just wanted her not to be there. That's really it. So, like I said, he's the only one who shows any kind of like remorse or sympathy towards Barbara. So he loosens her ropes a little bit, rolls her onto a sleeping bag, and uses his jacket as a pillow for her. Literally like the only sign of kindness that she's had in so long. This storm rolls in and Bobby is like on watch, and he's looking out the windows and sees like a flash of lightning and sees a figure walking up to the house. And so he's like freaking out. And then another lightning strikes and he's like, okay, no, that's definitely the picker, definitely walking up to the house. Bobby's on the second floor and he sees the picker under like their old patio. And again, he's like built up just how terrifying this ominous man could possibly be. Like Bobby's like, he's going to come in and murder me and kill me, and he's going to find out about Barbara and we're all screwed. The storm is not helping. Like, it's a very eerie situation, and being in this old house, Bobby's just freaking the fuck out. John also comes up to the house and he has to wait until his parents go to sleep. John is also kind of freaking out approaching the house because he's like, the picker could have killed Bobby. I don't know what I'm walking into. Like, this is terrifying. So John gives like a signal whistle and Bobby returns his signal with his flashlight. And inside the house, Bobby is like, John, he's outside. I don't know what to do. And John's like, let's talk to him. So they do. They go and talk to the picker, and they learn that his name is Cruz and that he's using the patio as a shelter from the rain. John's like, you hungry? There's food in the main house. They go to the main house and they let the picker stay in the basement and stay dry, and they feed him. So this is already like planting some fingerprints in the house, right? The next morning, John and Bobby explain like what happened, and Diane's like, we'll have to kill the picker too. I guess that's something we'll have to do. In chapter 10, it kind of backtracks to Barbara's point of view through the night, and she's officially broken. She's thinking, I wish I was dead rather than any of this. We learn a bit more about her conversation with Bobby that previous night, where she's like pleading with Bobby to stop the plan. She's just trying to understand like what he's thinking, where he's coming from. She asks again, why are you guys doing this? And Bobby says, I don't know, because we could, I guess. It seemed like fun. Like, when we were all figuring out if we could do it, it seemed like something we had to do, you know? Like, if you think you can do something, you have to. And then when Barbara asks why he won't let her go, he says they wouldn't like it. So I think at this point, Bobby is also kind of scared of the rest of the members of the Freedom Five, and is unsure what would happen to him if he were to go against their wishes. We also learn about what happened the previous night when John was watching Barbara, and Barbara is very, very quick to realize that John will rape her again this night. There is slightly more detail in this account of the rape that happens. However, again, I don't go into a lot of details. I graze over quite a few things. But again, if that is something that you do not wish to hear, then please skip to the timestamp listed above. She thinks he's going to hurt me and he isn't going to care. None of them will. Barbara is like, I am just an object to be used. Not just by John, but like any man who comes after him, I am simply an object. And she feels very wasted. John rapes her again, and Barbara orgasms, and she thinks, no, damn it, not now, not ever with him. The first rape was not that graphic. The second one was a lot more graphic. It talks a lot more about the lead up to it and how methodical John is about it, and it is a lot more graphic. So if you plan to read this and are sensitive to it, you can kind of skip this part, especially if you're listening to this review. You kind of already know what happens. It was hard to read. It was hard to reread, and I am ready to not think about it ever again. After John rapes her, Barbara asks why he's going to kill her, and he says, quote, "Because it's the next thing that happens. The first thing was that we could do it, and that's all anybody thought about. And then when that happened and it was boring, the next thing was this." And he says that he can't stop it, that he can't stop the plan that's in motion. The next morning, it is now Saturday. Diane washes Barbara, cleans her up, and Barbara is very much coming to terms with her death. She's like, it's happening. This is inevitable. I'm going to die. And she is thinking, but I didn't live long enough. I never lived at all, not until now, and why now? Why at the last minute? So she's asking Diane, like, why are you guys doing this? And Diane says, because somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. I never thought it would be like that with somebody that you were going to kill. That's why I got to be pretty as I can make it. It's a nice day and we have the time. A switch kind of flips in Diane and she's like, we may like you, but we hate you. You make everything bad with your lovey-dove talk. That's not the way it is. It's not the way we are, and we're going to show you. We're going to prove it. You'll see. You're going to get it. Barbara then asks, if this was all the other way around and you were me and I was you, would you want me to kill you? Diane says, I wouldn't want you. Barbara says, would you think I ought to? And Diane says, you'd be winners. It'd be up to you. There's very much this like idea in the kid's head that like they did this to see if they could. And then when they could, they're like trying to push that boundary and see just how much they can do and how much they can get away with. And then to Diane, it's like, well, this is the next step. Duh. To her, it's like we lose if we don't do this. And Diane does not want to lose. Barbara then, again, loses it and begins to demand that Diane just kills her right then and there. But Diane's like, nope, it's too soon, not yet. This isn't how it's going to be. Later, the children take Barbara out of the house and they tie her to like this gate that's nearby. There's a grill on and it's smoking. And Paul picks up a poker that's been heated on the grill and like pokes Barbara's foot, and because of how hot the poker is, it slides right through her foot, literally melts her foot. He then passes the poker to John, who reheats it, and John burns her breast, and then Diane, Sydney, and Bobby all take their turns as well, just torturing her with this poker. Afterward, the last inhibition's gone. They did all the things to her, under the circumstances, that they had ever imagined doing to all the invisible, meaningless people of their imagination. And while it was far different from what they had imagined, they persisted, and it all took a while. They literally just stand there, poking her with this hot poker until she's, like, unresponsive. At that point, they twist a rope around her neck and choke her. And at the very last minute, her eyes like pop open and she stares at all of them, and then she dies. Then that part of it was complete. Freedom 5 wept, oddly, with love. So I was shocked reading that. I truly thought, maybe delusional like Barbara, that there was going to be some kind of rescue. That at last minute, someone was going to drive up to the house and see Barbara being tortured and help her. I had this feeling that there's no way that they actually were going to go through with it and that Barbara was going to die. I think it makes the ending a lot better and really drives home the point that like the kids could do it, so they did. That she died. I hate it. I wish she didn't. I wish she was still alive. But I think it really hammers home the point of the book and reiterates the whole idea of the kids just being like, let's see if we can. And they do. So the epilogue gives kind of the outcome of everything following Barbara's death. The plan that the children made went absolutely perfectly. Before the kids go home that night, they lock Bobby and Cindy into the closet. That's not true. They don't do that. That's what they say they do. Before they killed Barbara, they had Cruz over in the house and had him do some things around the house and some yard work. So his fingerprints were truly everywhere. Then they kill Barbara, and Cruz, like, they walk Cruz out over to Barbara's body the next morning, and Cruz sees Barbara's mutilated body and is like shocked. He's absolutely distraught over what he sees, but before he has any time to think about what he's looking at, the boys shoot him. They very nearly cut him in half at close range. So again, the plan was that to make it look like Cruz had broken into the house, tied up and tortured Barbara, and forced Bobby and Cindy into the closet. John the next morning came over, found them in the closet, and then they went and found Cruz. All five of them are questioned. Diane plays it super cool. John ends up breaking psychologically and he starts going into spasms, and the questioning is immediately stopped before Paul could even say anything. John is questioned like bro to bro, man to man, like, come on boy, tell me what happened. There's no way you guys did this, right? Bobby, his questioning collaborates with the rest, and Sydney is like totally fine. And the investigator is even like, allegedly she cried all night in this closet, but she looks totally fine, and I guess that just shows the resilience of these young kids. The other pickers in town are questioned about Cruz, and they don't have a lot of information about him. They're like, yeah, he was a little weird, but like, don't have any issues with him. Like I said, Cruz's fingerprints are all over the house, and it's really difficult for them to examine his body because of how like close range he was shot. So they couldn't even figure out if the rape was from Cruz or not. The Adams end up moving within a year, and the house is bulldozed pretty soon after. And that's kind of how the book ends. We get some reminiscing on Barbara and who she was, and that her life was kind of wasted. We get the info from Terry when she finds out about Barbara's death, and how Terry is like, stupid kid, you should have never been there, and how Terry is not surprised though that this happened. There's some musing about if any of the kids ever crack, and that we'll just kind of have to wait and see if they ever, tell the truth about what happened. But that's it. That's the book. I think this one's sticking with me for a couple different reasons. One, it just felt like, even though all this takes place in a week, it felt like they amped up their torture so quick, when really they didn't. It was just a couple main days that they did. I also thought that each character was so realistic in how they react to the situation. Cindy in particular, because she's just acting like a 10-year-old. Like at the beginning of the book, she's like, oh, I just wish Barbara was here so that she could play with me, so that I have someone to talk to. And then she like teams up on Barbara when Diane's like punching her, because she's like, I gotta get a knock in too, just to like prove that I can. I think it's really interesting that this is like a game that the kids have played before, and how nonchalant Diane is about everything. How she's like, well, yeah, we've all played this game as kids, obviously, duh. When it's like, no, most of us never play that kind of game. I also think it's really interesting how like aloof Diane is, and how she's like, well, we're not actually hurting you, like, you're fine. We've all been there before. I thought John was really interesting in how, like, truly unremorseful he is about anything, and how he looks at Barbara as simply an object to fuck. I also thought Paul was really interesting, and I would be curious to see how he would have turned out if he didn't have Diane, like, being statistic in his ear. And I really felt for Bobby, because like I said, I really feel like Bobby just didn't want an adult telling him what to do, and that was really it. He didn't want to go and torture her. He didn't want to go and kill her, but he felt so obligated to, because of the threats that he was getting from the group and the fact that he was already there. Like, he couldn't back out now kind of situation. I also think Barbara's a very interesting character in her thoughts about the situation, and her kind of thinking back on her life and the things that she's done and said and been. She acts like a very meek person and a little bit of a goody two-shoes, and that's why the kids don't like her. She is kind of a plain Jane. She feels like there's so much more she could have done in her life, and that it's all kind of cut short. But at the end, she has come to terms with it. She's like, this is happening, and that's that. No one's gonna come save me now. I also think that it's a really interesting examination on the very end about how this investigation didn't go that far. There's definitely plot holes in like the story, and they could have very easily discovered that the kids were more to blame than they actually were, but because they look like good old American kids, that it's fine. That's I think my thoughts pretty much. I could keep going, but I'm just going to keep reiterating myself. I thought the characters were really interesting. I thought the writing was really interesting. It was really depraved. It has really stuck with me. I did not expect Barbara to die at the end. And it's a book that I'm surprised more people aren't talking about. Have you read it? Do you agree with me that more people should be talking about it? I think that's all I really have. I don't even know what else to say about this book, just because it ended in such a dark way. I think it was really awful that Barbara died, but I think it really hammers home the point of if they could, they did. And that was the point. There wasn't any greater thing that the kids were out to do, to test, to find out. They didn't do this because they felt like innately in their hearts that they want to kill people. They literally were just like, well, we did the small things. Let's see if we can do a slightly larger thing, and then a larger, and then larger, and then eventually, can they get away with it? Can they kill her? And they do. And they did get away with it. So I think that's all I have. I've been talking for a while now. I'm quite hungry. It's quite warm in my home as well. Woke up this morning and it was 80 degrees in my house. The high yesterday was 101, which is not horrible, I guess, but it does feel pretty awful when you don't have central AC. So I guess I can understand where the British are coming from. My bad, guys. I think that's all I have. Have you read the book? Did you like the book? Who's your least favorite of the Freedom Five? Because mine's Diane. She's public enemy number one. That's all I have. Until next time, peace and love. Bye.